Hello again. Conversations are continuing about opening up our buildings, hopefully so we can restart public worship there in September. You'll notice when I talk about this stuff, I try my best to talk about our buildings, or to talk about church buildings. That's because of the well-known cliche, although I'm not sure a cliche can be anything other than well-known. That's because of the cliche that the church is not the building, the church is the people. Well, it's both, of course. In normal, everyday use, the English word church probably usually refers to a building. At the very least, it can refer to a building, and therefore that is part of the meaning of the word. But we all know, maybe, that what really matters is the people. Christianity arose in the years after Jesus as one of the responses of the Jewish people to the disastrous destruction of the temple in Jerusalem by the occupying forces of empire. And one of the images of Jesus is as a new temple, not made with hands. The days are coming when you won't worship at this shrine or that temple, Jesus says at one point. The location of worship is Jesus, and perhaps more specifically Jesus' body. And then Paul gives us that image of the church as Christ's body. Hence, the church is the people, not the buildings. I've spent quite a bit of time in the last few weeks trying to keep on top of government regulations and guidance coming from the Methodist Church about what we can or cannot do, and how and when. I'm pleased that the guidance coming from the church, and by the word church I mean the Methodist Church, the institution here, I'm pleased that the guidance from the church encourages us to think about why. Why might we return to our buildings? And government guidance for all this doesn't talk specifically about churches at all, or church buildings. The phrase the government uses is places of worship. Places of worship. Of course, that's because the government guidance is not just for churches, but also for mosques and synagogues and gurdwaras and temples and so on. But that's what they call them, places of worship. And I wonder, what counts as the place of worship? In some of the conversations we've been having, we've wondered about the use of outdoor space. And so I've been particularly aware of some of the inconsistencies in the regulations when it comes to those spaces. I think there are inconsistencies there because places of worship are an exception to the general rule. And they have been an exception to the general rule, probably mostly because of lobbying from other Christian traditions than our own, for whom the physical space and precisely what goes on in there has greater theological importance than tends to be the case in our own versions of the tradition. But we are where we are. I think some of those difficulties, confusions, inconsistencies have been cleared up a bit recently, but I'm fairly sure I remember seeing that any outdoor space which is part of our land counted as part of the place of worship. I think they've now improved the wording to talk about outdoor space which is part of the grounds of the place of worship. Because without that change of wording, we might get the situation where, as from this coming Saturday, as I record this, face coverings will be mandatory in places of worship, apart from one or two exceptions, mostly, as usual, for people who have a medical reason not to wear a face covering. And I wondered whether that meant we would have to wear masks even in the outdoor space, if the outdoor space counted as part of the place of worship. And I don't think it does mean that, but I had to check. What counts as the place of worship? Meanwhile, we've been worshipping in a variety of ways, perhaps most obviously using the pre-recorded worship from the circuit. But people have been engaging with other things as well. We've worshipped in our homes and outside. I've heard of people finding worshipful space out on walks and so on. It's quite common to hear of people who say they find God out in the countryside. I wonder whether that's because we feel closer to what we might call creation, and whether it might also be because it's pretty. And we could get into the whole idea of the picturesque movement, of the romantics, the beginnings of tourism, that whole shift in thinking about the countryside from it being a place of wilderness full of threats to a place, a kind of ideal place of beauty, helped along by things like the Ordnance Survey giving us a new view, a neat view of what actually is out there in the countryside. But I have a busy day, so let's just say it's not actually obvious that the things we see out in the countryside are the beautiful things, even if it feels that way to us. And maybe the God we've found out there in the countryside, since the 18th century maybe that God feels a bit more like the comforting God who makes us feel nice, rather than the wild and strange God who challenges us. So perhaps we could find God in the regular shapes of the built environment too. And in the crowds of the city, once maybe we can ease our fears about the crowds. Though maybe our culture from the last 2 or 3 centuries makes that harder to see. But if God is in all and beyond all, then we shouldn't really be surprised to find God in the city at least as much as in the countryside. And what counts as the place of worship? Above the entrance door to the chapel at my training college was a printed notice. It's not original to the college, I know that, because it credits a particular Anglican church elsewhere. Presumably someone saw the notice there and then made a copy for the college. And I don't know whether it was even original to that church. But the notice says, "You are now entering a place of worship." When I first noticed the notice, I thought there'd been a mistake. The notice was above the entrance door, but on the inside rather than on the outside, so you read it as you left the building. Surely "you are now entering a place of worship" should have been on the outside, so you read it on the way in. But no, there was no mistake. You read it as you leave the building. You are now entering a place of worship. God bless. See you soon. Though not all that soon this time, as there'll be a couple of weeks rest for you from all this waffling. So go well. You are now entering a place of worship.